everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for ISACA Live. I am Kristen Kessinger, Director of Communications at ISACA, and I am here today with two special guests who have played a big role in the ISACA Journal, which turns 50 years old this year. So past board chairs, Michael Cangemi, Steve Ross, and I will be talking today about what has changed and what has stayed the same across these last 5 decades. The ISACA Journal is a member benefit, and our 150,000 ISACA members get a free subscription, and you can choose that to be in print or digital form. So make sure you're getting your copy and taking a look at that. So Michael, let's start with you. Can you introduce yourself and tell us how you were involved with the Journal and maybe a favorite memory or topic from the time?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to talk about the Journal. It was a big part of my life. So I started out life as a CPA auditor, and got involved with ISACA very early in my career. I had ambitions to move into corporate management and was eventually able to do that. So I'm very happy to do it. I joined ISACA in New York became on a committee, audit committee chair, and then moved on to international president. Well, first president of the ISACA New York chapter, and then international president. After my years on the international board, the position of editor-in-chief came up on the Journal, and I decided to take it. It was an interesting job for me, and I kept it for 20 years. So I'll tell you more about that later.
All right. Steve, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little about how you got involved with the Journal and what your role has been?
Sure. I'm Steven or Steve Ross, either way. Very similar path to Mike's. I joined ISACA in 1976. A few years later, I was president of the New York chapter. A few years after that, I was international president. Around that same time, when I was international president, I don't remember exactly, but I started writing articles for the Journal. I think it was at that point it had just at that point become the ISACA Journal, although in those days it was the EDP Auditor's Journal. But I was in information security, and I was mostly writing about those topics, information security topics, which shows a lot of consistency because, 24 years ago, I had lunch with a good friend, Mr. Michael Cangemi, and he said, Steve, would you like to write a column? You don't have to really put in that much time. Maybe, hey, you'll write for a few months and then you'll go back to doing your job. That was 24 years ago, and I've written in every issue of the Journal since then. So thank you, Mike.
Yeah, you both have been very long-time volunteers and so appreciated. I guess a question I have for both of you is, going back to the earliest days when you were involved with the Journal, what was it like at the time and what topics were making headlines?
Let me start with that. So as Steve already alluded to, the Journal started as a newsletter, and then it shifted to becoming, in my notes from the 25th anniversary, they were trying to emulate the Harvard Business Review, which is kind of a lofty goal, but they wanted to make it a learned journal, and they wanted it to be juried or having an editorial review board. So those decisions were made in the first 5 or 6 years after it shifted from a newsletter, and it was a very laborious job to be the editor of the Journal. So not many people kept it more than a year. And in the beginning, there was no staff, there was no management of ISACA. So Steve and I, we won't go into it today, but when we were international president, we were actually working to run ISACA. That was also a pretty laborious job. So back to the Journal, though, in those early days, we had no staff. We just did everything ourselves. That's part of my job as the editor, was to get people like Steve involved. Steve, I've been following Steve we do a line drawing of our career. So he was ahead of me. And one of the things that impressed me about him was his ability to speak at meetings when no speaker showed up. And I knew he was very bright, and I always loved what he had to say, and he had a lot of good ideas. So anyway, what you did as editor back then was you got in touch with everybody and you asked for articles. and then you put together a journal theme, not like eventually where you put together the editorial calendar in advance. That didn't happen until like 30 years later. So we were basically a hand-to-mouth operation. I would collect the articles, we review the articles myself, send them out to review, get back to the authors, make changes, and then work with the printer. I'm skipping a lot of steps, but it was a hands-on job back then.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any favorite early stories or topics that you covered at the time?
Oh, lots of them. So, I started in 1987. So before, let's dispense with before me. There was two groups before me. The very early years that we went through like 5 or 6 editors in chief. And then they decided to pay a stipend, a small fee to somebody to take it over. And a guy named Bill Perry ran it for 5 years. After that, there was only one person, Ken Pollock, who did it for 1 year and thought the fee wasn't worthy of the time. And he's the one that got in touch with me and asked if I wanted to take it. My company decided to move to Arizona. Steve and I are New Yorkers, if you can't tell by our accents, and I decided to stay in New York. And so getting a little part-time job, the story behind that for me is really interesting. I went to a meeting and I met the governor of Michigan, and when he asked me for my business card, I didn't have one. So I took the job as editor. I got the business card, and I didn't really think I would stay with it for that many years, but I fell in love with it sort of as a business project. So I'll go back to that later. And the topics in these years were incredible. But I think the segue to Steve, he already mentioned it. We started out IT audit and then helped build this profession called IT security people. In the beginning, we would just write nasty comments to the IT department and tell them to go fix it. And then they figured out they needed their own people. So Steve sort of was on the cusp of that shift. And that's why his column has been so successful for, I think, almost 25 years in the journal, because ISACA made the shift to focusing on IT security and audit, but IT security became a big theme. So I guess that was the first subject matter that I would mention in that period, and turn it over to Steve.
Yeah, Steve, your column, I think, is the longest running feature of the journal. And what changed? What was it like when you got started?
Well, I actually was starting before I picked up that column. As I recall, the first article I wrote was in 1980, and it was about security-related laws. But I think, Mike, you left out one editor, and that was Hart Will, who was he's a professor at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And during the time that I was president of the association, Hart, I don't remember if it was an accident or an illness, but whatever, he was unable to edit the journal. So for one edition, I edited the journal as president of the association. Somebody had to do it. I stepped up. I did it. It was hard. It was not easy to do. So I have a lot of respect for you, Mike, for doing it for 20 years. That's really something. But as you say, particularly in the times when ISACA was the EDP Auditors Association, the focus of most of the articles were on audit-related topics, sometimes financial audit, more often IT-related audit. But I was writing about information technology, specifically about security. Even at the time that I was president of the association, I was the first who was not an active auditor at that time. I was in information security at the bank where I worked back in those days. So, I think, as Mike says, we've seen a gradual and then not so gradual expansion of what ISACA is all about, to incorporate risk, governance, privacy, many other issues, some of which I feel competent in, privacy in particular, and some of which I don't. Governance, it's an interesting topic. It's just not my topic. And I'm very proud of what the journal has become. As Mike says, it's well respected. It's peer reviewed. You publish an article in the journal, and you tell all your friends. You're very proud of what you've accomplished. So I think ISACA generally, and Mike in particular, and how I've made my contribution. I'm very proud of that.
Yes, we're very grateful for both of you. Looking back, we've seen technology change considerably over, from 1972 to 2022, but are there any things that you've seen stay consistent across these 5 decades, whether it's principles or topics or anything that, you're surprised at maybe how much it stayed the same?
I think that's the whole foundation of what ISACA is all about. I mean, we didn't become a whole new organization just because technology changed. The basic principles are systems of internal control, security, respect for the information itself, which underlies privacy, respect for the potential issues, which underlies risk. All of that is been pretty constant over time. Just every time you put out one fire, it starts burning somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Mike, how about you?
The answer to that question is that the only, I know it's kind of corny, but the only constant was change. And it's remarkable how, for me, how ISACA has stayed, and by ISACA, I mean really the body of the membership, really, the people involved and the volunteers have kept us on course. I mean, as things changed, ISACA addressed them. And but I guess happily, there's been a lot of change, which is what's made ISACA so valuable for over 50 years now, and we've addressed them. So topics like computer viruses, that we did the journal issue on computer viruses in approximately 1986 or 87, and it was our cover story. And I started to add artwork on the cover. We did a picture of a hospital bed with a computer in it and a thermometer in the computer's mouth. And we started to address that subject. And 2 years later, 1988, Time magazine put computer viruses on their cover. And they did a picture of a computer, so it was kind of similar. We were also onto biometrics and all sorts of wonderful topics well before everybody else. Well, not always before, but in many cases before. And it's because of our membership. So the fact that the membership was in the trenches, feeding up the issues, the journal was there to capture them and to help share that information. And, you can't ask for a greater value from an association like ISACA than to, get information in a timely manner.
Yeah, I think that relates directly to my next question, which is that what was it about the journal? What is it about the journal that makes it so unique and special and inspired you to dedicate so much of your time to it?
Yeah, let me start with that. So here I am. I take the position as the editor. As we've already said, it's a laborious job. I'm not really the kind of guy that wants to sit home on Sunday and read 100 articles. What intrigued me was the business of the journal. So I couldn't go to a doctor's office, or I would wait at the train station in Penn Station in New York. I'd go in the magazine section of the coffee shops there, and I'd be flipping through magazines and trying to understand how they worked. Later in my later years, when we started to hire professional staff that went to Syracuse University and studied journalism, there was actually a clash at that point. So I learned about the front yard of the magazine, and I learned about advertising and revenue and subscribers. So for me, the joy in the 20 years came from two major places. One, watching it grow as a business within ISACA, and maybe it's not fair to call it a business, but we increased readership. We won awards during those periods, and as I said before, we covered the topic. So that was a lot of fun for me. The second part was I got to write a column. I did 120 columns. Steve's going to have more years than me and more columns. We tease each other about that. I'm not jealous about Steve at all. I love the fact that, hey, I was around to help get him in and, into doing what he's doing for you. So when I started, one interesting anecdote about my column, I was an avid reader of Forbes magazine, and the Forbes family had a column called Fact and Comment. I liked their format. It was little bullet points. It wasn't deep, long, lengthy articles. It was about 10 little subject matters. So I called my column Issues and Comments because I thought their fact and comment was too singular, and I wanted to be able to cover broader. And we had a part-time attorney working for us at ISACA, and he said, "Oh, we're going to get sued by Forbes magazine." So I wrote to Forbes himself, Malcolm Forbes, and I first got a letter back from his secretary saying he was busy traveling in England. He was marrying Elizabeth Taylor at the time. I was shocked he even wrote back to me. But the letter I wrote was, hey, this is an ISACA Journal, and I want to use this name versus yours. And then I got a letter from him that's, I had it hanging on my wall for most of my life. It said, flattery is the best form or compliment, right? And go ahead and use issues and comments. So I have a legacy of 120 issues and comments columns that ISACA gave me as a gift, all of them in one book. So it's a wonderful treasure.
Yeah, well, I was not expecting Elizabeth Taylor to have an inclusion in a conversation about the ISACA Journal, but that's amazing. Steve, how about you? What makes it so unique from your perspective?
Well, I think if you look through the journals over years, we've got two basic groups of authors, academics and practitioners. Covers pretty much 95% of all the people that write. And I love that conversation, that dialogue. I'm not a professor anywhere, so I'm one of the practitioners, but I do respect the academic approach because we have to have some intellectual underpinnings for what we do. And that's where that comes from. I find myself continually in a dialogue or multilogue with readers around the world. A lot of people make sure that they don't get emailed from overseas because they're worried about something that might mess up their system. But I always get email from overseas, people with comments, people with other ideas. Not infrequently, I have quoted some of the people that I've heard from in subsequent articles, always getting their permission, of course. I think that dialogue in the broadest sense is what ISACA is about. I would like to hope that the journal is a reflection of the personality of the association. And yes, 100,000 or I don't know, 125,000 members today. I've lost track.
Yep, over 150,000.
150,000. Mm-hmm. But I don't know what it was when you were president, Mike. I was presiding over 3,500 people. This opportunity to reflect what I say is the personality, the joint personality of 150,000 people is, I think, a very important contribution, not only to the professions that ISACA represents, but the society in which we are a part. And I've always felt that what I do as a professional is part of the ongoing battle. You can take it all the way back to the Industrial Revolution of trying to tame our technology and make it work for us instead of against us.
Absolutely.
That's been for us. That's what it's been for me.
Great. And yeah, you can see those comments holding true with some of our themes for this year's journal. We have the future workforce, resilience, emerging technologies like quantum. So let's imagine we're looking at an ISACA Journal cover in 2027, which is 5 years from now. What are some things you think we might see on the cover?
I'm going to start by saying I haven't understood ISACA covers for a good decade. There's something abstract every time. And I say, fine, it's pretty. I've got a stack of them here on my desk waiting to be read, read through. I always read some, but I never get finished. But I honestly feel that the technology is going to drive the interest but the skills are going to drive our approach. So that, I am notoriously bad at predicting what the technology is going to be in the future, so I'm not going to take a shot at that. But I do believe that we're still going to be worried about securing it. We're going to be worried about controlling it, about auditing it, about keeping information where it ought to be and using it for the approved practices. I think that, as Mike said, plus ça change, plus ça reste. The more things change, the more things stay the same.
For the benefit of the members that are still working in the early years of their careers and still dreaming about what else they want to do with life, the beauty is, as we've said a couple of times, is the technology keeps changing and we keep trying to stay up with it. So what you're hearing from Steve and I is what's, I think, the core principle, the core feature that keeps Steve and myself and all my colleagues at ISACA together is intellectual curiosity. So we know things are going to change. Steve said it. It's hard to predict which technologies. But to give you an example, in my career, I wanted to be a business leader. So the journal was great. I resigned from it after 20 years, but even though nobody was pushing me out yet, because I wanted to do other things, I became a CFO. I became a CIO for a little while, which was kind of scary. I became a CFO and then two-time CEO. So when I retired, my intellectual curiosity led me to, what do I want to do now? And I decided to not focus so broadly. Steve already mentioned, he knows his areas of expertise. When you're a CEO, you're very broadly focused. So I decided to work on technology and finance, those issues. And I wanted to work with tech startup companies and do something exciting. So what I'm doing right now are things that are going to be on the cover of the journal someday. I work with a blockchain distributed ledger technology company in the crypto space. So what I'm seeing coming now, I'm trying to understand the controls around blockchain ledgers. I'm watching DeFi and SoFi and all these new technologies and the expansion of the use of digital currencies and where we're going with the central bank digital assets in the future, all very much still hazy for me. I'm still trying to understand it. And I do still look at the control sides of it. The company I work with is called Luca Tech. And one of the things they look from me is to pay attention to regulatory developments, what the SEC wants to do with all this, what the governments around the world want to do it. So it can't be any more exciting than that. And eventually these subjects will be the subjects on the cover of the journal.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Michael and Steve, for joining us today. Thanks to all the volunteers and writers who have contributed to the journal, as well as our staff team. And thank you all for tuning in and watching today. So don't forget, members, that you get a free subscription to the ISACA Journal. It comes out 6 times per year, plus alternating articles online in the off months. And you can choose to get a print copy by going to the ISACA Preference Center and selecting print. So be sure to check out Volume 1, which has a 50th anniversary letter from our CEO, David Samuelson, and you can find that at www.isaca.org/journal. So thank you very much and have a great day.